up anything you want now. And so people think, oh wow, this looks really exciting, I'd love to do that. I want to do 2 more. Everybody wants to do 2 more. In a heat practice. And in Dao useful. So everybody wants to do 2 more, they want to do high tantric visualizations, they want to do Dzogchen. Very few people just want to sit and look at their breath. Boring. Breathing in, breathing out. Breathing in, breathing out. But, like those foundations in a temple, if you have no foundation, you can build a fancy temple in no time. The damp will rise, the walls will have cracks, the whole thing will fall apart. The fact that this temple is built and will stay and not collapse is because it's resting on very deep foundation. So likewise in our practice, if we cannot focus the mind, rest the mind on one place and allow it to merge, the mind and one's practice, then without that, nothing is going to transform. I'm not making this up. If you read the commentaries, it will say that you can recite mantras for 1,000,000 kalpas, eons. And if you have a distracted mind, no result. You can recite mantras for a very short time. And if your mind is completely merged with your practice, like that, the results will come. So, even though it seems like doing shamatha is, kind of not so important, actually, if we have good shamatha practice, the other practices come like that. But without it, without getting the mind slightly pacified and one-pointed, completely focused, so that when I want to think of this, I only think of that. When I want to think of that, I only think of that. Then the mind, normally our mind is here, the meditation object is there, and they're kind of looking at each other and trying to get together. But if we have good shamatha, then they go like that. And the practice leaves the head, and we're all too much in our heads anyway, leaves the head and just automatically goes down into the heart. And it's a whole different level of being one with your practice. This is why the Buddha himself emphasized having a strong foundation in shamatha before going into any other practice, because the other practices won't really work. It's so shaky. A while back, in America, there are these group of Americans who, back in the 70s, went to Burma and Sri Lanka, and they practiced Vipassana meditation. And they practiced very, very sincerely. I mean, really very dedicated Vipassana practitioners. And then they started centers in America, which became very, very popular. Then a few years ago, they went to Nepal to meet with this great Lama called Tulku Ujjan Rinpoche to learn Dzogchen. And then they started practicing Dzogchen. And so I was quite curious why they did that. So I asked them. And they said, well, we got to a certain point and then it was like hitting a ceiling. We couldn't get beyond that point. And I asked one of their teachers, one of their Nyingma teachers, what he thought, because his father had been their main instructor. And he said, Well, they had, because of their practice, they had reached to the subtle mind, but they had not yet reached to the very subtle mind. He said, but because their minds were so well trained, when they got the instruction from Tulku Ujin Rinpoche, like that, they could do it. They just immediately they made the breakthrough. He said, whereas most people, their minds, they don't have the foundation. Therefore, they can't do it. I mean, it all sounds very good, la ho. But then what? You know, and you see it. You know, people have very high ideas of their practices, all the lamas they've met, all the roles they've taken, the high instruction, and then somebody takes their seat in the meeting, and that's my seat. You know, all of this ego, aggression, anger, greed, all just comes out immediately. What have they learned? So, therefore, my advice really is, you know, slowly, slowly. Get your mind into good shape, then everything else comes quickly. But without that, we work and do 10 million mantras, and what's the use? Paldanatisha, the great Bengali pundit, he said that when you go into retreat, if you go to retreat for a year, the question at the end is, has my afflictive emotions, my greed, anger, jealousy, and so forth, has it increased? I'm more angry and upset if people, you know, bother me. Has it stayed the same? Or has it decreased? Now, if we find that we do not get upset so quickly, if we find that our minds naturally bring forth feelings of kindness and caring towards others, if we are much more content with what we have and much less interested in getting more and more and more, much more interested in giving than in receiving, and so forth, much less concerned about me, and much more concerned about the happiness of others, then we can think that that retreat actually worked. It is not a matter of how many millions of mantras we accomplished. That is totally irrelevant. How has it affected our mind? Are we nicer people? This is the question. Meditation is to transform our mind and to arouse deep insight into the nature of our reality. But it has to be, it's like if you're a surgeon, you know, you have to sharpen and clean your scalpel. You know, all your instruments have to be very clean, very sharp before you perform the operation. Likewise, before we dissect our sense of ego, of self, we have to have very clean, sharp tools to do it with. And another point is that also we should have a happy, healthy ego to dissect. Because if we try to dissect a sense of self which is already injured, which already suffers with low self-esteem, which is already uncomfortable and hurting, then it is very likely, psychologically, we will do more damage than good. And this is, again, why shamatha practice is very important, because it heals the mind. If we really can get into a state of calm, then naturally, inwardly, joy arises and a sense of inner well-being. The mind settles, the heart opens up, it becomes much wider, vaster, more spacious, more clear, more centered. It's a very healing process. And we have to have a healthy, happy sense of self before we can start, as I say, dissecting it through insights. So in all ways, the Buddha very much encouraged that people should practice this, practice of shamatha. He himself went into very, very deep levels of shamatha. Maybe in this modern day and age, not so necessary, but at least some basic foundation. Because otherwise, any other practice we do, no matter how fancy it is, this super secret, never before taught, whatever, absolutely trans-exotic, esoteric, whatever, it's not going to work. It's not going to work because our minds cannot take it. It cannot do it. I mean, it's like if you want to play, you know, Chopin or Beethoven or Mozart. I mean, it might be the greatest music in the world, but you can't play it if you don't know your scales. Everybody knows that. So first we have to start with scales. Scales are not very exciting, but they're essential. And actually, shamatha meditation, if we get into it, is wonderful. In fact, it's so good that many people don't want to get out of it. And so sometimes it is given bad press just because people get so enamored of this peace and this sense of spaciousness and clarity and the fact that one can, as attention is so finely honed, that when they're told to go on to more analytical meditations, they don't want to leave that very blissful state. So this is regarded as being a drawback to shamatha, but of course it's not a drawback, it's just that you need someone then to push you forward once you get to that point. But in the meantime, you know, we need to get to that point. Then worry about it. So tomorrow there will be a guided meditation on how to do shamatha practice. So I do encourage all of you who possibly can to attend this. It would be very, very helpful. This is just a basic introduction to why it's important. It's not the actual practice. But I do advise all of you who can possibly make it to come for this tomorrow. Then I've also been asked to speak a little bit about what are called the Brahma Viharas